Snow had fallen in the night, not gently, but with a wind that howled like wolves and cut like broken glass. By morning, the hills around the Brogan ranch were buried under white silence, and the pine branches creaked under the weight of it. Elias Brogan came out with his rifle slung low and his breath turning to steam, trudging toward the edge of his northern fence line. That's where he saw her. At first he thought it was just a heap of frozen rags half buried in the snow beside a half-dead mesquite bush. But the heap moved. He stopped cold. Then came the cough, dry, shallow, desperate. He stepped closer, boot crunching in the frost. It was a girl, Apache, maybe 15, thin as reed, skin cracked from the cold, lips trembling violet. Blood soaked the bottom of her dress and one arm looked wrong, swollen, bone shifted. Her eyes opened when she felt his shadow fall across her. She didn't speak, just stared, wide, dark, and still eyes. In her lap was something wrapped in hide and leather cords, small, bundled tight, clutched like it mattered more than life. Elias took off his coat without thinking, wrapped her up, lifted her gently, bones against ribs. She didn't flinch. She just breathed slow, shallow fading. Back at the ranch, the stove roared and Elias laid her on the cot. He didn't ask who she was or what she was running from. He saw death circling close and he'd buried enough bodies to recognize its scent. But before she slipped into sleep, she whispered one word. Not English, not Spanish. It sounded like a name, or a place, or a warning. Whatever it was, it stirred something old in him, something he'd tried to bury beneath 3 winters of silence. Elias Brogan had once been known in Dry Fork for his quiet strength, the kind of man who spoke with a nod, answered with a gesture, and never turned away a hand in need. Folks said he had a good laugh once, back when his wife Lena still sang by the fire, and his boy Jesse rode fence lines beside him, too young to saddle his own horse but eager to try. That life ended 3 winters ago when the raid came at dusk, not from a tribe like some tried to claim, but from men wearing badges and bandanas hired by a railroad syndicate to clear disputed land. The Brogan homestead sat right on the edge of that greed. The night ended in fire. Lena's body was found near the barn. Jesse never found at all. Elias didn't speak for a month. Not at the burial, not to the sheriff who looked away, not to the preacher who left bread by his door. He packed what was left, sold his cattle, and vanished north to a rocky stretch of land no one wanted. There he raised sheep instead of cattle, built fences without paint, and kept his rifle close. Every Sunday for 3 years he rode to town just long enough to buy salt, ammo, and beans. He never spoke more than 5 words. 5. Folks stopped asking. They said the fire took his tongue. In truth, the silence suited him. Pain didn't echo as loud without words to bounce off. But the girl, she didn't belong in the world he'd carved. Elias sat in his wooden chair that night, watching the firelight flicker across her still face. Her skin was fever-slick now, her breath shallow but steady. He'd splinted the arm, cleaned the gash near her ribs, fed her broth with a spoon. Each gesture clawed at old instincts buried beneath calluses and whiskey. On the mantel sat Lena's old comb, untouched in 3 years. He caught himself looking at it more than once that evening. The girl slept with one hand still wrapped around that bundle leather, stretched and weathered, decorated with black beads and red threads. Something sacred, maybe. He didn't pry. He recognized the way hands clung to grief. When the fire dropped to coals, Elias stepped outside. The moon was a thin coin above the ridgeline. He lit a smoke and stared into the snow-bound hills. Something itched at the edge of his thoughts. A shadow he couldn't name. He didn't know who she was or what trouble would follow. But he knew what it meant to be hunted, not for who you are, but for what you carry. Inside the cabin, her fingers twitched. She whispered again in that other tongue. One word, then silence. He stayed outside a little longer, the wind scratching his skin, trying to remember what it had felt like to protect something small and dying and not be too broken to care. When Elias came back inside at dawn, the fire had dwindled and frost crept along the window glass. The girl was awake barely. Her eyes tracked him, dull with fever, but holding on to something deeper than pain. She didn't flinch when he stepped close. She looked like someone who had run out of fear a long time ago. "You understand English?" he asked. No answer. He knelt by the cot, laid a hand on the blanket he'd wrapped around her the day before. "You got a name?" Her lips parted. Dry. Cracked. "Nolly," she rasped. Her voice was smoke-thin, soft, full of old dust and stubborn roots. Elias gave her water, slow sips. He fed her another spoon of broth, and she took it without turning away. He noticed then the streaks of red around her wrist, bruises hidden under old rope marks. Someone had tied her. She hadn't escaped the cold, she'd escaped people. After she drank, she slept again. For 2 more days, she drifted in and out of fever. Elias sat near, checking her bandage, warming stones to place near her feet, saying little. The sheep didn't mind the quiet. Neither did he. The storm passed, and the hills turned white gold under the sun. By the 3rd morning, she sat up, leaning on one elbow. Elias brought her food. She pointed at the small medicine bundle beside her. "Don't touch," she said, voice firmer now. He nodded. "Didn't plan to." "It's my mother's," she added. "All I have." Elias caught the flicker in her eyes. Grief, yes, but also steel. "You got family?" he asked. She looked toward the door as if the land outside held the answer. Not anymore. That night she stood by the hearth, the blanket around her shoulders like a cloak. She moved slow but proud, like someone raised with ceremony. She didn't speak much, but her silence wasn't hollow like Elias's. Hers held memory, not regret. She touched one of the sheep that came to sniff her hand and whispered something to it in Apache. Elias didn't ask what it meant. The next morning he hitched the mule and said he'd go to town for medicine and cloth. "You'll be safe here," he told her. She nodded once. But as he turned to leave, she held out the bundle. Not to give, just to show. "They want this," she said. "They'll come." "Who?" he asked. "Red Scalp Riders," she whispered. Elias froze. That name hadn't crossed his ears in 3 years. A band of bounty hunters, half myth, half devil, known for torching native camps and faking raids to justify their pay. Ruthless men. No morals. No mercy. And tied by blood to the worst night of Elias Brogan's life. He looked at her at the fire behind her, casting shadows on the wall. He could feel the world shift, slow and quiet, like snow sliding from a high branch. He thought of sending her away, but something in him had started to thaw, and he wasn't sure he could freeze it back again. Not yet. 2 days later, the Red Scalp Riders arrived in Dry Fork like a gust of dust and rot. 7 men on horses, too clean for their eyes, coats lined with coyote fur and old bullet scars. Their leader was a man named Vane Cutter, long black coat, silver buttons, mustache like a saber's edge, and one eye lost behind a leather patch stitched with red thread. Folks said he earned it in Mexico, took it himself to match the Apache elder he killed. Vane didn't speak when he rode in. He let the horses clop through Main Street slow, the kind of slow that made mothers pull children inside. Sheriff Dugan stepped out of his office, hand resting near his holster. Looking for someone, he asked, not unkindly. Vane Cutter removed his gloves finger by finger. "Half-breed girl. Stole from a dead camp. Something sacred. She's got no kin, no law, no right." Sheriff hesitated. "No girl like that come through here." "Not through town," maybe, said a smaller man behind Vane, Jeb Cobb, always smirking. But a trader said someone rode north. Quiet place. Lonely. "Ain't much up north," Dugan said. "One sheep rancher. Keeps to himself. All the better," Vane said. "We'll ride light." He tipped his hat, then added, "We always get what's owed. God or no God." They turned their horses without waiting. Sheriff watched them go, jaw clenched. He remembered Elias Brogan, remembered the fire, the bodies, the silence. Part of him wanted to warn the man. The other part knew Elias wasn't the type to run. Up in the hills, Elias had already spotted their tracks. He stood on the ridge above his cabin, spyglass in hand, watching dust trails move like serpents across the lower basin. Nolly stood behind him, pale but steady. "They're coming," she said. "I know. They won't stop." Elias lowered the glass. "Neither will I." She looked at him, uncertain. "Why help me? Because I should have stopped them before," he said. And he meant it. He remembered now the night his ranch burned, the flash of silver buttons through the smoke, the cruel laughter as fire devoured his world. He'd buried that memory under silence, under the lie that raiders came from the desert. But it had been men. Paid killers. Red Scalp Riders. That night Elias dug up the old weapons chest, took out the Sharps rifle, the 6-shot Remington Lena's shotgun. He cleaned them with hands that trembled not from fear but from waking up after too long a sleep. Nolly sat by the fire, fingers working beads back onto the medicine bundle. "My mother said this carries the story of our line," she said. "Her bones, her songs, her courage. They want to erase that." "They won't," Elias said. He built traps along the fence line, laid powder in a dry creek bed, fixed a broken hinge on the barn door and nailed shut the rear entry. Every movement was slow, deliberate, like a man laying bricks for his own tomb. Nolly helped where she could, limping still, but her hands were quick and sharp. That night they ate beans by candlelight. She asked, "Were you a good man?" before Elias stared at the flame. "No. But I had one." She nodded like she understood. Just before dawn, Elias stood on the porch, eyes scanning the dark basin. He saw them come, 5 now, riding in a V. The snow caught their shapes like shadows frozen mid-howl. He didn't go inside. He waited. When they came within range, he fired once, clean straight through the chest of the lead horseman. Chaos followed. The riders scattered. Bullets split the cold. Elias ducked behind the shed, reloading. The war had begun. Jeb Cobb flanked left, circling toward the barn. But the trap was set, a hidden tripwire tied to a keg of powder. The explosion took his horse out from under him. He screamed as snow turned red. 2 more came straight for the cabin. Elias met them head-on, shotgun roaring. One dropped. The other made it to the porch, only to be met by Nolly, who struck him with a burning brand. He stumbled backward into the snow. Elias dragged her back inside. "Stay down," he said. She shook her head. "I'm not scared. You should be." "You were," she whispered. But not anymore. The final standoff came as Vane Cutter circled back alone, furious. He dismounted and approached the cabin with his rifle raised. Elias stepped out, bleeding from the shoulder gun lowered. "You," Vane said, recognizing him. "I remember your ranch. We lit it up real fine. Thought you were dead. You're not the first to think that. She's not worth it, Brogan. She is." Vane lifted his rifle. Elias fired first. The bullet hit just beneath the eye patch, driving him to the ground. Silence followed, deep, bone-deep silence. When it broke, it was with Nolly's footsteps crunching over snow, her hand gripping the bundle close to her chest. Elias knelt by her side. His blood stained the white ground. He looked up at her and said, "It's done." She nodded, kneeling too. "Not yet." She opened the bundle. What lay inside would change everything. The bundle opened slowly, reverently. Elias watched with a hand pressed to his wound, the blood warm under his fingers, his breath like broken glass in the cold air. Nolly's hands were steady now. She unwrapped the outer hide layer, then the inner cloth, revealing a series of items tucked together like bones in a grave. The first was a small pouch of earth red as blood, likely from her village. The second, a braid of raven black hair tied with sinew. The third, and most telling, was a stack of old pages, damp-stained but still legible, folded neatly and bound with a faded blue ribbon. Elias took them with shaking fingers. The writing was in English, neat feminine. The first line, "If I die, let the truth be known." He read quickly, his eyes narrowing. These were journal pages. The voice behind them belonged to a woman named Mara, Nolly's mother. She had documented everything the night her people were surrounded. The lies told by scouts working for the Red Scalp Riders, the names of the men who took bribes to paint Apache families as raiders. And buried in the middle, a single line that made Elias stop cold. One of the women murdered north of Dry Fork was not Apache. She wore a white ring and called for her boy as she burned. He read it twice, then again. His voice came out hollow. "My Lena." Nolly looked down. She was trying to help us. They called her a traitor. Elias dropped the pages, his breath catching. He remembered now, not in fragments, but all at once, Lena had gone to deliver winter clothes to a nearby settlement of peaceful Apache. She had taken Jesse with her. Elias had stayed behind to repair a fence. When the smoke rose from the valley, he rode hard, but too late. He'd never questioned the story the town gave him. Killed in a raid, they said. You're lucky they didn't come for the house. But the riders had come for them. For truth. For silence. They murdered her, he whispered, to keep the money flowing. Nolly nodded. My mother said the riders are paid per kill. Women, children, it doesn't matter. Each scalp counts, even if it's white. Rage didn't hit Elias like a flood. It came like a slow fire through his limbs, burning low, steady, dangerous. He stood ignoring the pain in his side and stared out across the blood-slick snow. Veincutter's body lay twisted beneath the frost. Smoke curled from where the powder trap had exploded. The smell of fire, old and new, clung to the wind. We need to show this, Elias said. The sheriff, the townspeople, someone has to see. Nolly hesitated. They won't believe me. I'm Apache. Then they'll believe me, he said. They used my grief to hide their sin. They turned me into a ghost for their comfort. He started gathering what remained, the bundle, the journal, the surviving ammunition. He burned the dead one by one in a shallow pit, not out of honor, but to deny them the dignity of names carved into stone. Nolly helped silently. She didn't ask what came next. She seemed to know. That night the sky was orange over the valley fire, eating what little remained of the Brogan ranch. Elias had lit it himself. The sheep had been turned loose, the fences cut. He didn't plan to return. They rode out at first light, Elias on the mule, Nolly behind him, holding the bundle like a sacred heart. It took 2 days to reach Dry Fork. Along the way they spoke little. Elias's wound slowed him, but he refused to stop. The town hadn't changed, same chipped signs, same dusty main street. But when Elias dismounted in front of the sheriff's office, dragging a blood-stained coat and carrying a dead man's rifle, people noticed. Sheriff Dugan stood from his desk, eyes narrowing. Elias, I've got something you need to see. The sheriff took the journal, read the pages, pale as snow by the second entry. God almighty, he whispered, they played us all. Elias nodded. You'll testify? Dugan looked at Nolly, at the fire in her eyes. I'll do more than that. News spread quick. By evening the saloon was quiet, the streets solemn. A judge from the next county would be summoned. Papers would be shown, names named. But nothing moved Elias like what happened next. As he sat outside, shoulder wrapped in bandage, Nolly approached and knelt beside him. She held out the bundle. This was never meant to be mine, she said. I carried it to deliver truth, but it belongs to you now. Elias stared. Why me? Because you gave me warmth when no one else would. And now I give you what matters most. She pressed the bundle into his hands. It was warm, like life, like ash still holding its fire. Carry it, she said. Like she did. Like I did. Elias clutched it tight, and for the first time in 3 years he wept, not for Lena, not for Jesse, but for the man he had failed to be and the man he might still become. He looked to the sky, stars bright and cold. Somewhere in that quiet blaze he felt a hand on his shoulder, Lena's. Or maybe just memory. Either way, he didn't flinch. The fire in the valley had not just burned his home. It had cleansed something deeper, something that could not be taken by blood or silence. The hearing was held 3 days later in the Dry Fork Chapel, the only place big enough to hold the crowd. Word had spread fast, faster than Elias expected. Ranchers came from distant hills, miners from the foothills, 2 traders from across the state line. Not all believed it. But they came. They came because Elias Brogan had walked in alive. Because the Red Scalp Riders were dead. Because something in the air had shifted. Sheriff Dugan stood behind the pulpit reading Mara's words aloud. His voice cracked on the 3rd page, steadied by the weight of what followed. Details of names, payments, ledgers signed in secret by territorial agents, descriptions of the so-called raids that were nothing but massacres, all laid bare. Nolly sat in the front row, her face unreadable. The medicine bundle rested in her lap. Not a relic, now a weapon of truth. When the sheriff finished, the room held a stillness thick enough to feel. One man stood, Harris from the general store, a former Confederate, and asked, "How do we know she didn't lie?" Elias stood then. The whole room turned. Because my wife was one of the people they killed. She wasn't Apache. Wasn't. She was bringing food to a camp. She died trying to do good. That don't prove Harris started, but Elias cut him off. She was wearing my son's name around her neck. That necklace was found among the riders' trophies. He stepped down the aisle, slowly, limping. They didn't just kill. They collected. Hair, teeth, jewelry. He reached the front, turned to face them all. I believed the lie. For 3 years I thought it was some tribe's doing. I let hate live in my chest. But this girl, he looked at Nolly, this girl carried truth through snow, through blood, through silence. He held up the bundle. This is my family now. Some in the crowd looked away. Others nodded. A few wept. By week's end, the governor sent word the remaining riders scattered across the territory would be hunted and tried. Compensation would be offered to victims' families. The land seized by false claims would be returned, not all but some. Enough to begin. Elias didn't stay in Dry Fork. He gave Nolly the deed to the Brogan land. It's yours now, he said. Grow something better than what I left behind. She took it with both hands, a faint smile in her eyes. I will. They parted on the hill overlooking the valley where smoke no longer rose. Snow had melted into green. Grass grew soft beneath their boots. She wore the blanket he'd once wrapped around her, patched and fraying but strong. He wore a leather strap across his chest, the medicine bundle tied close to his heart. Where will you go? She asked. Where the silence doesn't hurt, he said. Maybe where people still remember how to listen. She touched his arm. My mother said stories live longer than stone. Tell it true. I will, Elias promised. He turned his mule and rode east, not fast, not slow, just steady. Every hoofbeat echoing the rhythm of something lost, then found. The bundle hung close, beads clicking like wind chimes against the old bones inside. Not all wounds scar on the skin. Some live in choices, some in silence. Elias Brogan had chosen wrong once, but now in the late hour of his life he carried truth not as burden but as offering. Justice doesn't undo the dead, but it lights the road ahead. And sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that's everything. Elias died in the spring thaw weeks later under a cottonwood tree near the Red River. A passing trader found him with his back against the trunk rifle across his knees, the medicine bundle still tied to his chest. No sign of violence, no note, just the soft hush of water nearby and a crow watching from a high branch. They buried him where he lay, built a small cairn of river stones and carved a cross into the bark. The trader took the bundle, unsure what it was, and carried it south. In time, it found its way back to Dry Fork into the hands of a girl who now kept her mother's beads beside a shotgun and ledger. Nolly Brogan didn't change the land much. She left the broken fence posts as they were, let the house remain in ruins. Instead, she planted a ring of cedar trees in the center of the field, one for each name in her mother's journal. When spring rains came, she lit a small fire there and sang. Not a hymn. Not in English. A song older than the town, older than the riders, older than the lie. Children would grow and ask what the trees meant. She would tell them softly, each one is a voice, and when the wind passed through it did sound like singing, high, clear, aching. Sometimes a rider passing through would ask about the woman who lived alone on the ridge. Some said she was a healer. Others swore she'd once killed 5 men with fire and steel. None knew for sure. But when they saw her walking the hills with a blanket over her shoulders and a satchel of bones and beads at her side, they rode a little quieter. And far beyond that valley, along canyons where only eagles flew, the echo of a man's choice once buried in silence lived again in the hands of the one he'd saved. A single choice can burn through snow-carved stories into blood and leave behind not ashes but the shape of courage made visible. Footprints do not last, but where they lead, sometimes that becomes legend. If this story moved you, follow the trail to the next true tale of the West. Subscribe and walk with us again.